Excuse me, it's Frank here. Thank you.
Cannibal Corpse, innovators of death metal, gory lyrics and album covers, heavy riffs, and controversy out the arse. In this video, we'll be going through the legendary Cannibal Corpse discography and doing a deep dive on every album. This will be a two-part video, with one on the Chris Barnes era and one on the Corpse Grinder era. I'll go through a brief history on the band, lineup changes and all that jazz. I won't really be talking about the controversy surrounding this band, more just about the music and brief but important moments in the band's history. Now, before they became the biggest death metal band we all know and love, the members were previously in other heavy thrash bands, all forming in Buffalo, New York. One of the bands being Tyrant Sin, which featured vocalist Chris Barnes, drummer Paul Mazurkowitz on drums, and some other geezer named Rich Ziegler or some shit, who was on bass. During this time, the band mainly played covers from bands they dug, such as Accept or Celtic Frost, then eventually wrote originals and played a handful of gigs. Eventually, Chris Barnes left the band to join another band called Leviathan, who were quite well known in the underground Buffalo metal scene, but were short-lived, only doing a demo and performing a few gigs, then disbanded. Since Tyrant Sin were down a vocalist, both drummer Paul and bassist Rich did vocal duties on their first demo, Desecration of the Graves. And honestly, for musicians who weren't proficient in their own instruments, let alone doing vocals, it's actually quite impressive. It's very exciter sounding, with hints of high vocals, like King Diamond or something, and the instrumentals are pure thrash. After this demo, they got a vocalist by the name of Dennis Ginlinski, I think that's how you pronounce it. They did another demo called Chaotic Destruction, which is pretty solid, but eventually Chris Barnes joined back after the departure of Leviathan. Kind of sad on Dennis's part, but I guess shit happens. With this lineup, they recorded a demo titled Mutant Supremacy, which is a pretty solid listen. It might be my favorite out of all the demos, and probably the most infamous out of them all. After this, they quickly disbanded. Around the corner from them was another band brewing called Beyond Death, which featured guitarist Jack Owen, bassist Alex Webster, and drummer Darren Fafia, starting a power trio. They got to work and wrote some original material and introduced themselves quickly to the Buffalo scene and started playing gigs. Interestingly enough, bassist Alex Webster did vocals during the early days, and fuck, he actually sounds pretty fucking evil. Very melee from Creator vibes, especially Pleasure to Kill era. Afterwards, they would get a guy by the name of Franklin Body to join on guitar and vocals, and they would perform as a four-piece, and eventually recorded a demo titled A Slice of Death. I believe Frank did all the vocals on this demo, but to be honest, I actually prefer Alex. I don't know, he just sounds more vicious than Frank, but it's still a very solid demo. Then, due to musical differences, they broke up. Now, with both bands broken up, it was time to brew a new band. Members from each band joined forces and created the first formation of Cannibal Corpse in Buffalo, New York in 1988. Those members were drummer Paul Mazurkowitz, who's still in the band today, bassist Alex Webster, who's also still in the band today, our two guitar players being Bob Rousset and Jack Owen, and good old Chris Barnes. They went straight to work, started writing songs and performing, and in the process making a loyal fan base in their hometown, and recorded a 5-track demo with tracks that will be featured on their debut album. Their first show was actually opening for Dark Angel when they played in Buffalo, which is pretty sick, considering Cannibal Corpse were heavily influenced by Dark Angel. After making a strong local scene, building up their chops and making connections, they'll eventually get signed to Metal Blade Records, a well-respected metal record label. They made a trip to Tampa, Florida to record at the iconic Morrisound Studios and recorded their debut album, Eaten Back to Life.
Listen, I got a couple questions for you. Anyone out there remember Leviathan? Yeah! Cool. How about Tyrant Sin? Yeah! How about Beyond Death? You know what happens when you combine the best of each? That's right! Cannibal Corpse! Let's go! Come on!
1990 was a stacked year for death metal. You had sick bands releasing absolute classics, like Obituary, Cause of Death, Entombed, Left Hand Path, D-Side Self-Titled, and so much more. Although I don't think Eaten Back to Life is as good as those records, it does stand on its own. It's a very unique album in the Cannibal Corpse discography, and kind of an odd one out, as it sounds a lot more death thrashy. And you can hear clear influences from bands like Creator and Slayer. Shredded Humans opens up the album, and it's one of the best tracks on Eaten Back to Life with its frantic vocal patterns and sick cymbal chokes. Edible Autopsy is my favourite track on the album. I love the wacky and twisted opening riff, and those cymbal chokes later in the track is so fucking punishing. Another sick song is Put Them to Death, which is a short but sweet banger. It's just 2 minutes long, but that's all it needs. It's one of the faster tempo songs on the album and has a cool bass solo. Another highlight is Born in a Casket, which has a really heavy build-up that leads into a simple but badass tempo riff. And then, of course, the classic Skull Full of Maggots. They still play this song to this day, and just the iconic chromatic riff is so punishing and great energy packed into a 2-minute banger. I will say Chris doesn't quite sound as brutal as what he will eventually become, but it does give Eaten Back to Life its own identity and adds character. The band was still very young at this point and truly wore their influences on their sleeves, which resulted in a raw and primitive sounding Cannibal Corpse that makes Eaten Back to Life stand out in the catalogue. And lyrically, Chris Barnes isn't quite as blunt as what he would eventually become, but still graphic and gory lyrics regardless. I feel that this album doesn't get much love nowadays. Yeah, it doesn't have as many classic songs by the band, as they weren't quite at their songwriting peak, but it's still a vicious album regardless that stacks up with the greats. After playing more shows and rapidly gaining a following in their scene, they went back to the studio to record their monumental second album, that being Butchered at Birth, released in July 1991. First thing you'll notice about Butchered at Birth is that it's much heavier than Eaten Back to Life. It's a huge step into the sound that we know from Cannibal Corpse, especially its early era. It's way heavier, more brutal and gory, and Chris Barnes sounds a lot less thrashy with his early creator vocal style, and more into his guttural sound that still holds up to this day. I couldn't even imagine hearing this back in 1991. I would say that Chris Barnes and Frank from Suffocation, especially on Effigy of the Forgotten, was some of the deepest vocals in the scene at the time. And at this point, Chris Barnes was writing 100% of the lyrics, and he's way more graphic and disturbing. On Eaten Back to Life, the lyrics seemed a lot more about storytelling, about zombies and other stuff that sounded way more fiction. Whereas on Butchered at Birth and moving forward, a lot of the lyrical content is inspired by real-life murderers, and honestly, it sounds like Chris Barnes himself is doing these horrible things. Obviously, it's all fictional, but that's what makes these early albums sound so sinister and evil. And with all that, it creates an unwelcoming atmosphere that screams death metal. The opening track, Meat Hook Sodomy, has a very unnerving, distorted noise intro with gutturals coming in and out. It kind of sounds like the song is being played backwards, but the riffs are faster and the vocals are slower. It's very hard to explain, but it sounds evil. You just have to listen to it. The rest of the song has those classic hammer-on, pull-off riffs that Cannibal's known for, all while telling a PG-13 story about some poor bloke getting his rectum punished by a hook. Lovely. Gutted is another highlight. It has a sick triplet opening riff, then hits you with the blast beat section. They still have this song regularly in their set list too. Covered with Sores has a slow, eerie intro, and the album closer, In Its Decay, is insanely underrated. It has a very crushing, groovy intro, with a badass breakdown that instantly sends adrenaline down my spine. It might be my favourite track on Butchered at Birth, to be honest. There's also a guest vocal spot on the track Vomit the Soul with Glenn Benton from Deicide, and both Benton and Barnes doing vocals simultaneously, which has a very nice demonic touch to the song. It actually sounds like a Deicide song during that part, as Deicide is quite known for the whole dual low and high vocal approach. I will say the rest of the track listing isn't the greatest for me. I know many of you might find that blasphemous, but it's actually my least favourite Chris Barnes album. Some tracks I just find to be filler and don't hit as hard as some of the tracks I just mentioned. A lot of people aren't a fan of the production on this album, which is fair, but doesn't bother me much, although the guitars do sound very buzzy at times. And the bass is barely there. I mean, it sounded pretty awful on Eaten Back to Life, but here on Butchered at Birth, there's no bass solo breakdowns or anything really that gives tracks the hook it needs, and Alex is pretty much just following along with the guitars the whole time. Which is fine, but on future albums, he throws in some iconic bass moments, but it's just not present here. That being said, there's no denying how influential and important this album is on death metal, and this is arguably the band's most important album. It just doesn't quite stack up to the next two albums that we're going to talk about. During the Butchered at Birth album cycle, they toured the USA and Europe and made a name for themselves. Little did the world know, Cannibal Corpse was just beginning. They went back to the studio to record their third full-length album, which ended up being released in September of 1992. That album being the legendary Tomb of the Mutilated.
Pretty much, the vocals and the lyrical content have a lot to do with the death metal sound. There's bands that are grindcore that, have a little different sound, but some people might say they're death metal. So it's basically all in the listeners. Like Jack said, you might consider something death metal, another person might not. But as for everybody out there, we're death metal.
Tomb of the Mutilated introduces you to three absolute classic and banger tracks from the band. At this point, if you're a death metal fan, you should know Hammer Smash Face. It's considered a hit song for death metal standards, much like Pull the Plug by Death or Slowly We Rot by Obituary. It's like the Bohemian Rhapsody of death metal, if that makes any sense at all. It has some of the sickest hammer-on riffs with that badass bass solo and a disgusting breakdown. This song honestly just never gets old. It was actually the first death metal song I ever heard, and honestly, I didn't get it at first listen, but it did grow on me as I got more into death metal when I was a wee teen. Icon Blood is next, another banger. It starts off fast as fuck with tremolo riffs, then hits you with a slow but disgusting slamming palm muted riff that will instantly give you that sour lemon face. Addicted to, track 3 is my personal favorite Cannibal track. The opening sample is so disturbing and honestly kind of just sets the mood for this track in general. But the rest of the song kicks ass and has another sick bass breakdown solo that is arguably cooler than the one on Hammer Smash Face. Split Wide Open is one of the shorter tracks on the album, and it kicks you right in the teeth. And it's one of the thrashier songs on the album with its spastic riffs and almost consistent blast beats that will never give you a break. Jesus, Paul must have had a stroke after recording of this song. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the next song, but track 5, in my opinion, has some of the most fucked up lyrics in any Cannibal Corpse song. It's funny, I didn't really know what this song title truly meant until my girlfriend described it to me. Then I read the lyrics and oh my god, this is nasty. Chris Barnes really had a way of lyric writing, but the track opens with that classic twisted sounding riff. Similar to the intro on Edible Autopsy and Gutted, it's actually one of the more thrashier tracks on the album too. But it's crazy to think how far they pushed the limit of not only their sound, but death metal as a whole. Honestly, out of all the Cannibal Corpse albums, this is the one where I actually feel disturbed and disgusted when I listen to it. Obviously, they have horrifying topics on every record, but there's just something about this album that makes my skin crawl. Maybe it's Chris Barnes' inhumane vocals or the lyrics, but regardless, it has an atmosphere that is so unmatched. And Tomb of the Mutilated is a huge step up in terms of songwriting, brutality, and pushing themselves as musicians. And this album maybe has my favorite bass tone in not only death metal, but just in music in general. Alex turns up the treble knob to the max, and he does a lot of those random cool licks here and there, along with some of the best bass solos in metal history. And the guitars sound so crushing, and way more aggressive compared to the previous two albums. And my god, so many riffs on this album that go so hard. From the opening riff on Hammer Smash Face, to the creepy tremolo riffs on the Cryptic Stench, and just the way the palm mute sound is so heavy. I'm not a drummer at all, so it can be hard for me to fully digest a drummer to their full potential, but I love the drum sound on this album. I mean, just listen to those cymbal chokes at the start of Hammer Smash Face, and tell me that doesn't pump you the fuck up. If you're new to Cannibal Corpse, this might be a decent place to start as it has some iconic tracks from the band. But keep in mind, this is also them at their heaviest, and probably their most unapologetic album they ever did. But yeah, I don't have anything negative to say about this album. You'll hear people say it's overrated, and I get it, but I think it deserves all the credit it gets. And look at that album cover. I censored it so this video at least has a small chance of not getting taken down, but far out, that's nasty. After the release of Tomb of the Mutilated, original guitar player Bob Rousset was let go due to not progressing with the band on a musical level, and his songwriting didn't quite match what the rest of the band wanted. It's unfortunate because he was such a sick player, but Cannibal Corpse knew if they wanted to further their career, this is something that they had to do. But shortly after, they recruited Rob Barrett from Solstice and Malevolent Creation. If you haven't heard those bands, I highly recommend checking them out. They're sick. At first, he was there to just cover the touring duties, but ended up being asked to join the band. then arguably one of the most unexpected moments would happen to Cannibal Corpse. A little-known actor called Jim Carrey invited the Cannibal Corpse boys to play a scene in the 90s classic comedy called Ace Ventura, which exposed many to death metal, whether they liked it or not.
How did that come about, and what kind of exposure has it given the band, if you had any feedback from that?
Oh, yeah, we've had a lot of feedback. Basically, what happened was Jim Carrey, the star of the film, he's a big fan of the heavier styles of music, like death metal. He likes a lot of hard rock and stuff. And he basically told the production company there at Morgan Creek that he thought we'd be a good band for the part that they had in mind, and we went ahead and did it. You know, they called up Metal Blade, and it was a real good time. We actually had a lot of fun doing the movie.
It's a very different experience, I would think.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was kind of helped, too, you know. We had a little bit of experience going in filming the first video after that, you know, after doing that, going through that type of thing.
Honestly, much respect to Jim Carrey. That's pretty cool. So after releasing a beloved album that instantly became a classic, gaining a new member, and becoming part of one of the biggest comedy movies of all time, what do they do next? Well, they went back into the studio and recorded another album, maybe the best album they ever did. That being The Bleeding, released in April of 1994.
So when you came to write the new songs for The Bleeding, did you at all take into account the issue of censorship in any way?
No, not at all. I just wrote basically what I felt in my gut, you know, and just wrote that on paper. We always just basically go about writing as like something that we want to hear ourselves, and putting it down like that, we don't really worry too much about what other people think.
Considered to be one of Cannibal Corpse's best records from this early era, and even considered among the best in death metal history. And rightfully so, as this is probably the catchiest album they ever did. I know a lot of people don't like to use the word catchy in death metal, but I said it, I don't fucking care. I've even heard several people say this is like a pop album for death metal fans, which is a valid take. The opening track, Staring Through the Eyes of the Dead, for a while was my favorite Cannibal song. It has a classic hammer-on pull-off main riff with a sick bass breakdown and a back-and-forth solo between Jack Owen and Rob Barrett. This song has the band's first music video too, with the video following along with the lyrical theme of the song. Some of my favourite Cannibal Corpse songs are the short but sweet tracks that every album has. Fuck With the Knife is a part of that, as it's just 2 minutes of pure insanity with some of Chris Barnes' fastest vocal phrases since Eaten Back to Life. Lyrically, it stems back to Tomb of the Mutilated with blunt lyrics that will make your skin crawl. I'm just going to call the next track Stripped and Strangled, but it's an absolute classic from the band. It opens with their heavy mid-tempo riff that develops faster as the track progresses. Chris Barnes has some weird vocal effects on this track, which originally I didn't like at first, but it grew on me the more I heard this track. And I mean, I may as well just talk about every song on this album. The next track is Pulverized, which brings back the thrashy energy that this band's early influences came from. Halfway through the album, we have the criminally underrated Return to Flesh. It's slow and doomy with dissonant riffs that waver in between the faster moments. I've heard some people say this is one of the weaker songs on the album, but I completely disagree. The only song I'm not huge on is the title track, The Bleeding. It's not bad at all, I just don't really like the main riff of the song, and it plays pretty much throughout the entire track with slight variation here and there. I guess because it's the title track, I almost assume that the title track will be one of the stronger songs on the album, but in this case, it's actually my least favorite on the album. Again, it's not bad, just not a song I come back to regularly. She Was Asking For It is such a whack and vague song title. I mean, it made me read the lyrics because I had to know what this woman was asking for in particular. All I can say is she was completely innocent and our antagonist was not. Cannibal Corpse became top songwriters on this album. From the way each track is structured, so many earworms and hooks that are so memorable, and it's some of Chris Barnes' best lyrical storytelling. I will say this is where Chris starts doing those high-pitched E kind of vocals that he becomes a big fan of in his later career. It kind of works on this album, to be fair, but it can be a turn-off for a lot of people, and he sounds a lot more understandable on The Bleeding. On Tomb, you have no idea what this man is spitting out, but on The Bleeding, his pronunciation is really goddamn good. Barnes was always pretty linear with his vocals on past albums, as he was just still trying to find his voice, much like any other death metal vocalist at the time, because the genre was still pretty fresh. But on The Bleeding, he tries new things and experiments with his voice. Whether that's for better or worse, that's up to you. Now, honestly, I struggle to choose a favorite Cannibal Corpse album between this and Tomb of the Mutilated. As of this very second I'm recording, it's probably Tomb of the Mutilated, but next week it could change to The Bleeding. As of 2025, this is actually their highest selling album, which makes sense as Ace Ventura was released 2 months prior, so a lot of people would have just discovered Cannibal Corpse. And the band had a lot of press and promotion with music videos and interviews on MTV and just overall being a strong album. Cannibal Corpse is known for their graphic and gory album covers. Now for this one, they went with their censored art for the original. Here's the original, but the actual art they used back in '94 was a zoomed in image of the zombie's chest. And majority of the time, the non-censored art is better. But in this case, I actually prefer the censored. It's kind of like, what the fuck even is that? It has this mysterious edge to it, as you don't really know what it is at first. I know some people might think the album cover is a bit tame compared to their last few albums, which ultimately it is, but I still think it's cool. But yeah, anyway, The Bleeding goes hard, and this is also a very good album to start with if you're a newcomer to Cannibal Corpse. And a solid place to start if you're new to death metal in general. There's a reason why this is amongst the top selling records in the genre, and deserves all the worship it gets. Okay, well that's all of the officially released studio albums for the Chris Barnes era of Cannibal Corpse. But there's still one more release I want to talk about. That being the Creator to Kill bootleg/demo. I'll only briefly talk about this release as it's not an official album or anything, and pretty much all of the songs will be released officially on their 5th full-length album. This is the recording session of what was going to become the next album for Cannibal Corpse. I don't know the full story about this release, but I guess Chris Barnes half did the album before getting fired / leaving the band. I'll discuss more about the departure of Chris Barnes in part 2, but let's dissect a bit of Creator to Kill first. Creator to Kill is basically a bootleg and a demo of majority of the tracks that would be featured on the next album. You have the opening track Devoured by Vermin, Mummified in Barbed Wire, Punctured Wound Massacre. Then you have songs that made it onto the next album but with different song titles, like Unburied Horror and Gallery of the Obscene. I believe all the lyrics are different too, as Barnes wrote these on Creator to Kill, then they were changed on the official release. It's quite interesting hearing Barnes on these tracks and the different vocal patterns, but I do prefer the official release of this album with Chris Barnes, to be honest. But I'll leave it at that because I'll go more in depth about it in the next video. Well, that's all of the main releases with Chris Barnes on vocals. There might have been some stuff I missed, so definitely let me know in the comments. Keep in mind this video wasn't supposed to be about the history of the band, but more about what I think about each album, and also give your opinion on these albums too, because I feel Cannibal Corpse is a band where almost everyone has a different set of favorite records by them, and prefer different eras. But yeah, I'll be doing a part 2 eventually with the Corpse Grinder albums, and yeah, thanks for watching.